Hello, and welcome back. If you're new to the channel, welcome. And if you've been following along through the PIW-CWG series, thank you for continuing this slow walk through some difficult but important ideas. Up to this point, we've talked a lot about persistence, how information survives, how structure rearranges instead of resetting, how entropy filters what can last. Today, we're going to talk about the other side of that story, because persistence is never unlimited. This episode is about collapse, not as a disaster or a failure, but as a threshold, a point where the conditions that allowed a structure to persist quietly stop being met. Collapse is not sudden. It only looks sudden from the outside. Every structure that exists does so by exporting entropy. Stars shine by dumping heat into space. Galaxies persist by redistributing energy and matter. Living systems survive by continuously pushing disorder outward. Persistence always depends on an outlet. As long as a system can move entropy away faster than it produces it internally, it remains stable. When it can't, collapse becomes inevitable. That's the core idea. Collapse thresholds are crossed when a system runs out of options. This doesn't require catastrophe. It doesn't require violence. It doesn't even require change in external conditions. All it takes is the slow narrowing of available pathways. Entropy accumulates, gradients flatten, flexibility disappears. And then, at some point, the system can no longer pay the cost of remaining what it was. What makes collapse confusing is that most of the work happens invisibly. From the outside, a structure can look stable right up until it isn't. That's because stability is not about how things look. It's about whether the underlying flows are still viable. Once those flows fail, collapse happens quickly because there are no longer any slow paths available. This pattern shows up everywhere. Stars collapse when fusion can no longer support their weight. Ecosystems collapse when energy flows are disrupted beyond recovery. Civilizations collapse when coordination costs exceed their ability to adapt. Even physical structures collapse when internal stresses exceed their capacity to redistribute them. In every case, collapse is not a sudden choice. It's the delayed result of earlier constraints piling up. From the PIW-CWG perspective, collapse is not the opposite of persistence. It is persistence reaching its limit. Every structure persists by narrowing the future. Each successful moment removes alternatives. Over time, the system becomes more specialized, more constrained, and less adaptable. That's not a flaw. It's how persistence works. But specialization has a cost. The more tightly a system is optimized for one set of conditions, the fewer paths it has when those conditions change. Collapse thresholds mark the moment when adaptation space reaches zero. This also explains why collapse often feels surprising. We tend to focus on surface behavior, production, activity, complexity, and miss the slow erosion of flexibility underneath. By the time the collapse becomes visible, the system has already lost the ability to recover. In that sense, collapse is quiet for a very long time, and then fast. It's important to say this clearly. Collapse is not evil, and it is not a mistake. It is a physical outcome. No structure can export entropy forever. No gradient lasts indefinitely. No configuration can remain optimal as constraints accumulate. Collapse is the universe enforcing its accounting. And here's the part that's easy to miss. Collapse does not erase history. It rearranges it. When a structure collapses, the constraints it created don't disappear. They get redistributed. Energy spreads, matter reorganizes, information becomes harder to access in detail, but its effects remain embedded in what comes next. Collapse clears the way for renewal, but never for reset. Nothing starts over clean. This is why collapse is not the end of the story. It's a transition point. What follows is shaped by everything that came before, the gradients that existed, the paths that were taken, the entropy that accumulated. In later episodes, we'll talk about renewal, how systems reorganize after collapse without returning to zero. But that renewal only makes sense once you accept collapse as unavoidable. Persistence always has a budget. When it's spent, collapse follows. Before I close, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. These ideas are not meant to be comforting or alarming. They're meant to be honest. Understanding collapse doesn't weaken our ability to build or sustain structure. It improves it. My name is Charles Carroll, and this is part of the PIW-CWG series. In the next episode, we'll step back and look at the entire framework, how all of these layers fit together as a single coherent system. Thanks for being here.